So we're going to talk about radical candor today. And as always, one of the things that I do when we start these sessions is just to connect the dots. We've done over 200 episodes of Squiggly Careers podcast now. And I try to kind of think about, well, what is a playlist on this topic? If you wanted to listen to more than one podcast, and this is something that is particularly relevant and useful for you right now, where else might you go? What else could you listen to? So obviously we've got the radical candor, or let's not use that color. Obviously we've got radical candor that we're going to talk about today. Other episodes to have in the back of your mind, you've got 205, which is about how to fix feedback. 98, which is courageous conversations. And number 19, a very early episode on feedback. So that was our first episode that we did on feedback. If you go onto our website, under podcast, we do now have search functionality. So if you ever want to do this for yourself, you can just put in, let's say you were thinking promotion, or I've got an interview or something like that. You can go into the website and search. It's not 100% foolproof yet, but it's better than no search at all. And the other thing that we always recommend is an app that's free that both Helen and I use called Overcast. And if you use Overcast, again, you can search in their top bar for a particular topic, which again, we know that people don't listen to our podcast in a linear way, which makes sense given it's a Squiggly Careers podcast. So if you want to dive a bit deeper, connected a few of those dots for you today. So let's just talk a bit about this idea of radical candor and just make sure that we're clear on these different categories of types of feedback that we can give to people. And I think it's just worth exploring them a little bit, because the words that Kim Scott uses, and she says this, and she's actually very fun and funny and very happy to not take herself too seriously. The words that she uses are deliberately provocative. And so sometimes I think that can mean that we miss the point or miss some of the nuances that actually, as I've been researching each of these terms more, I found quite useful. So we'll come to radical candor last, but let's just start up here with ruinous empathy. And essentially what this means is that you're really caring, you really care personally. So kind of going up to this axis here, you really care personally, but you care so much that you would never give feedback that could or might hurt someone's feelings. So you sort of have this level of kind of worry that you think, well, this is quite a difficult message. I'm not sure how someone is going to receive this. So either you do one of two things. You either don't deliver the feedback at all, you avoid it, you just don't do it, or you do deliver feedback, but you do it in a way that's either so woolly or so generalist, or perhaps even so positive that people miss the point. And so you perhaps think you've delivered some feedback about wanting someone to improve on something, but actually that's not what they've heard, because that you've sort of delivered it with such a kind of caring way, perhaps been really, really positive, perhaps your tone, your body language, everything's been really, really positive. And so people go away from that conversation thinking, oh, I'm doing pretty well. I've not got too much to worry about. And you think you've actually just told them about something they need to improve or get better at. The other thing to bear in mind with ruinous empathy that I thought was interesting is that by doing this, essentially you are setting people up to fail. And that can be quite a helpful consequence to propel us all into action. Because you care, the idea that you're actually setting someone else up to fail feels really uncomfortable. So that can help us to kind of lean into what can be a difficult conversation, these courageous conversations, because actually you're not telling someone something that could help them to improve. And so they're just, that you don't know what you don't know. So you just keep doing that thing because nobody has told you that it's not positive or that you could improve it or you need to get better. It's that classic thing. And some of you, let me know in chat if this has happened to you, where particularly where you do things like annual reviews, you have an annual review with a manager and they tell you about something 6 months ago or 9 months ago that you got wrong or that you could have done better. And then you think, well, why are you telling me now after 9 months? Like I can't fix it now, or I've been doing that same thing for a really long time. And so you've just sort of left it with someone. The other reason that we sometimes don't do this is we hope it's going to sort itself out. We think, oh, it'll probably be okay. I'll just leave it and hope for the best. Let's just have a look at chat there. So Chris saying, yeah, working in a charity. My sister actually works as Samaritans, and she was saying that actually that people are so caring and thoughtful that people find it very hard to deliver difficult messages. Kim gave a great example on the podcast about that she sort of didn't sound like she had the clarity and confidence when she used in between words. I mean, it was quite a harsh message for her to receive, but quite interesting. Let's move on to this next one, which is about manipulative insincerity, which sounds horrendous. And at its worst, it is about you're being fake. You're either receiving fake feedback or you're giving fake feedback. You're like, yeah, you're doing great, or it's brilliant, and you don't care enough to actually give someone difficult messages. So if you look at the axis here, you're not caring personally at this moment, and you're just sort of going with the flow. You care more about yourself than you do other people. Now, this one sounds really bad, and then I kept reading about it. And the other reason, actually, Kim Scott says sometimes we do this is that we are tired and struggling for time. And when I stopped and thought about that, I can think of loads of examples of where you just think, I've got so much on, it would be easier just to fix this for myself. Or I'm really overwhelmed at the moment. And so someone might ask you for feedback, and you're quite flippant and quite fake about just going, oh yeah, it's great. Yeah, just kind of keep doing what you're doing. And perhaps that's not really the feedback that someone needs or what they're looking for. And I think I can imagine myself having done that. And as much as I don't like the category about being manipulative, sometimes the pressures that we're under might mean that we are fake to an extent. So I just found that kind of really interesting just to think about. This next one, obnoxious aggression. Now, interestingly, Kim Scott says, after radical candor, this is the second most preferred box of most people. I thought it would be ruinous empathy, but it's not. It's actually obnoxious aggression. What this essentially means is that someone doesn't care loads, so they're much more in the challenging than they are in the caring, but they are very straightforward. You know exactly where you stand. Someone might deliver those messages with not a lot of empathy or care, but they do deliver the message. And what she found is that most people would prefer to know and perhaps to hate their boss than to not know and to feel like everyone's kind of getting on, but perhaps they're not really. I actually thought that was quite interesting. I mean, none of those things are good. To be clear, none of the three boxes are good, but if you're going to a second best, that's kind of what she suggests, which I was like, okay, I can, particularly when I was in more of a corporate environment, I can see why people would choose that one and go, well, at least I know what I need to do and I can cope with that. And then we get up to what is essentially the holy grail of radical candor. Now, it's worth being really clear, I think, on radical candor, that radical candor is rare. And Kim Scott talks about there are not loads of examples of organizations where they have really embedded radical candor into their culture. Certainly, if you know of examples, I'd love to hear them. Because actually, when you talk to Kim and Tria about the work they do with organizations, there's very few where they say, oh, they've really managed to embed this in a way where they get it right all of the time. And I suspect it's probably not something you can get right day in, day out. It's something you need to kind of keep working towards. But the reason that radical candor works so well is it appeals to both kind of our hearts and our minds at the same time, because you're still really caring, which is kind of the heart and the feeling and the emotions. And it appeals to our more logical and kind of rational minds at the same time. We're very clear. The messages are very clear and concise. The other thing on radical candor that I think sometimes gets missed, radical candor applies to both positive and improvement, or what we would call even better if feedback. Radical candor doesn't mean delivering just difficult messages. And I think that's sometimes a mistake that we make when we think about radical candor. It's actually about the clarity, conciseness, usefulness of the feedback that we're giving. So just bear that in mind. A couple of questions for you. So I'd love to know, and I'm going to compare our group to a couple of stats that I found. Do you feel that you give feedback in a way that gets close to radical candor? And do you feel like you receive feedback at the moment? And so These are your yes circles. These are your no circles. So are you giving feedback that gets kind of close to that? And are you receiving feedback that gets close to that? It's a high bar, but let's see where we are as a group. I'm just starting to look at the chat for 1 second, and Helen's talking about going to concerts, which has thrown me.
I'm answering questions. Ignore chat. I'm on chat. Sorry. I'm not. It's all
I'm like, what's happening? Am I that boring that everyone's like, oh, what concert should we go to?
No, it's relevant to feedback, I promise.
No, I'm joking. Let's see where we get to. Really reassuring here that we have got some yeses. We have got some people going, yeah, I feel like I'm getting there, or at least I know what this feels like. I can recognize this. The percentages are managers, which I find interesting, feel like 15% of managers, only 15% of managers feel like they give kind of radically candor feedback, give feedback in a way that has kind of radical candor. So actually people's self-assessment and awareness of, actually, I don't feel like I do this is quite high. So we know that there's a big gap. And what was it? 26% of employees feel like they receive radically candid feedback from their managers. This is a particular manager employee manager question that they did. So, you know, perhaps some managers are doing better than they give themselves credit for. We can give managers quite a hard time. And many of you might be managers as well. So perhaps you are doing a bit better than you think. But I thought these were two really interesting questions to kind of ask ourselves. So what I then started to think about, what gets us closer to candor? So if we recognize that this is a high bar and it's a rare environment to find yourself in, where radical candor happens day in, day out, what are the actions that we could all take and try out that gets us closer to candor? So I think I got to 5 or 6 different ideas, and then let me know if you've got any others. So the first one is about not delivering really elongated feedback and actually making it short, sweet, and specific. So this is really, we sometimes talk about, you perhaps have heard us talk before about the 3 R's of feedback: regular, relevant, and real time. This is not about waiting and then having an hour conversation about feedback and giving somebody feedback in that way, or even asking for feedback in this way. This is about, you know, a 5-minute conversation, a 10-minute conversation, a 15-minute conversation, once a week, once every other week. One message at once, I think is a really good principle to think about here, is actually when we're asking and when we're giving feedback, let's try and be short, simple, and specific. It gets us much closer to candor. And it means that we're much more likely to remember what people are telling us. Too many messages and we sort of lose the message. It's why you see politicians repeat things time and time again. Sometimes the best feedback I've received is when people have told me that feedback, stopped talking, waited to see what my reaction to that feedback was, and then actually just stayed on that point. Perhaps given me another example to bring it to life, perhaps talked about it a bit more, but really stayed in that one message and on that one point. And kind of linked to this, not doing, I'm going to use the kind of polite thing, don't do the feedback where you do, here's some positive, here's some negative, and here's some positive, all as part of the same conversation. Zero evidence to demonstrate that that works, because what is the only thing that we remember is this. And as we said, radical candor applies to these things too. Those things, the positive praise, the specific positive praise of what you're doing well, and why you want someone to keep doing more of that. And that will get lost if we try to not only deliver too many messages, but certainly if we try to do the good, bad, good as a way of softening often feedback. That's the reason why people do that. I think that's probably where that came from, is, oh, does this make delivering difficult messages a bit easier? No, it just means that people don't hear them. The next thing, and I'm really guilty of this one, don't wait to give difficult feedback. Because I'm a natural reflector / overthinker, if something is a bit difficult to talk about, and I really remember an example of this, I got a difficult message to deliver to somebody, and I thought I really want to see them in person in the days where that was a thing, to deliver this, because it's a difficult message, it'll be better face to face. And also I want to think about exactly how I'm going to structure this feedback. And then I waited, and then I waited, and then I was quite busy the next time I was in the office, and I didn't quite get a chance to talk to that person. Suddenly it was 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks after the fact. I was getting more into the avoid mindset of thinking, oh, is it worth it? Back to ruinous empathy. Oh, maybe it'll fix itself. Is it really worth having the conversation? That's all about me. That's all about me thinking this is going to be hard. I've missed the moment a bit. And so now I'm not going to do it. So, I mean, the best way, if you spot yourself doing it, I still had the conversation, but I definitely had it too late after the fact. And actually, if I'd have delivered that difficult message sooner, that person could have remedied that mistake they'd made or that opportunity to improve really quickly. And that would have been much better for them. And I didn't give them that chance. And that was me. That was my fault that I'd not given them that chance to go and have a conversation with that person and say, well, actually, I got some feedback that perhaps some of my behaviors in that meeting could have been a bit tricky for this. And, actually could have gone and had some actually just really positive, constructive, maybe quite challenging conversations. And I remember really learning my lesson that time, because thinking this is really unfair now on this person. So don't wait. I often think one of the things that's really hard on difficult feedback is how do we structure it in a way that is useful so that we don't keep talking. And one of the methods that both Helen and I have used before, and we sometimes talk about in our feedback workshops, is situation, behaviour, impact. I think this is particularly helpful for delivering difficult kind of messages or difficult feedback. I don't go into these conversations thinking situation, behaviour, impact. I use it as a way to prepare. I'll think, right, let's say I need to have a difficult conversation with Helen, which I still wouldn't like doing. I don't like doing them with anyone. I would think, what was the situation? What was the behaviour that I observed? And then talk about what was the impact that either it had on me or I thought it might have on our team or our ability to deliver our objectives. And I've actually gone as far sometimes as thinking, well, what are the 3 sentences? I wouldn't then deliver it in a kind of robotic, here are my 3 sentences way, but just to make sure I'm clear about what it is I'm trying to say. And if it was really difficult, I might even practice it out loud. I might even just think about saying, Mark, I've noticed in a couple of team meetings now, situation, that you interrupt me quite frequently. Like earlier on today, I noticed you interrupted me kind of 2 or 3 times. Behaviour. The impact that has on me is it makes me feel like you're maybe not interested in my opinion, or perhaps I don't need to be in that meeting. And then you sort of stop. And it feels awkward and it feels hard. But at that point, of course, sometimes people get defensive, and you can't control that. You can only control whether you choose to deliver a message. Sometimes I think when you deliver difficult messages, of course, people get defensive, and you sort of have to go, but I have opted to kind of tell you this. But a lot of the time, I think people don't realize what they're doing. Lots of the time people say, oh, okay, I hadn't actually, it can be quite hard to hear, but I didn't realize that I was doing that. And people might say, sorry, or I'm going to try and improve that, or at their best, and you can be these people, thank you. The brilliant managers, those leaders that you work for, that you're like, wow, they are exceptional. The first thing they say in response to difficult feedback is thank you. You know that it's hard to deliver feedback, particularly upwards. And then the last one is about asking. If you want candor from other people, if you're thinking, well, I want people to give me more simple, straightforward feedback to help me to improve, and I hear that a lot from people, and you're not really getting it, particularly if you're in a position of power. And Kim and Tria in particular with their next book, Just Work, have talked more about power dynamics and how that impacts feedback. If you are in any position of power and influence, if you want to start receiving lots more candid feedback, start asking for it and be really specific about the kind of critique that you're looking for. I was thinking about this, and so yesterday at the end of a workshop, rather than asking for what went well and even better if feedback, which is often what we do, I just asked that group for even better if. I just said to them, I said, I really want one opportunity to improve from everybody. Now, give me one thing that I could do better. And for us, we use this even better if language. And actually what we find is, because people feel quite comfortable with even better if, we get quite candid feedback. You know, I'd like one more breakout, please. I didn't understand that point. And none of that actually feels hard to hear. It just feels simple and straightforward. So just really get into the routine of asking for feedback, and perhaps asking for feedback that you know might be quite hard to hear. It's as easy to avoid giving feedback as it is to avoid asking for feedback too. So I'm going to ask everybody to share their screens. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, sorry, in a minute, and we're going to do a photo just for the last couple of minutes. But I'd just love to, Helen, is there anything else from chat just before I do that?
I just want to pick up on the very last thing that Ting said about, kind of almost being scared to get radically candid feedback. And I think there's a really interesting perspective on this, which is the more you ask for it, the easier it gets. And that's not because you just get more comfortable asking, it's because you end up with more feedback and you're less sensitive to any one person's opinion or perspective. And so I think about it as almost like I'm trying to collect data. I'm not trying to inform my doubts. What I'm trying to do is ask enough people for feedback so that I have data about what they think, and then I can spot trends. Then I can work out, well, okay, 5 people have said that I'm sort of too assertive in a meeting, I don't let other people talk. That's a trend that I should. If just one person says that, that's feedback through their frame and through their filter. And we all bring our own frames, we all bring our own filters. But if multiple people are saying it, then that's data that you can choose to do something about. So it's sort of like a weird thing where it might feel really hard, but sort of the more you do it, the more data you get and the easier it becomes. So I just think about it, data capturing.
One thing I did find is Kim Scott has a free guide to radical candor in your organisation. So we'll put the link in chat, and then we will also put the link as part of your resources for PodPlus. She's also done interviews for HBR. She was on Bruce Daisley's podcast recently, Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat. So if you wanted to double down on radical candor. But I would also look at, she has free online courses that actually are delivered in a really interesting way. They're really funny. So they're a bit like The Office, particularly the American Office, and she's sort of done them as a bit like improv. And so very different to some maybe other American learning you might have seen before. But she has done her best, I think, to try and, in quite an open way, share the work that she's done, while still being very open to, we definitely haven't cracked this yet. And I suspect radical candor isn't really something that you crack.